Hi. This is the beginning of a lesson on cellular respiration. So cellular respiration kind of makes it sound like we're talking about cells breathing. But really what's happening is we're breaking down food in our mitochondria. So what does that have to do with respiration? The reason that we call it the reason that we want to make that connection between respiration, breathing, and cellular respiration, breaking down food, is because they're actually intertwined. The reason that we breathe is because we need oxygen, so we inhale oxygen, to give to our mitochondria. That's the organelle in our cells that breaks down food. So we breathe in oxygen so we can break down food in our mitochondria. Then what happens is you go through a bunch of chemical reactions, and we make a lot of carbon dioxide in the process, which our body doesn't need or want. So then it sends that back into our bloodstream and up into our lungs, where we exhale the carbon dioxide. So the reason that we breathe is because of cellular respiration. If we didn't have lungs, we'd have to just suck the oxygen in through our cells to get to the mitochondria and then push out the carbon dioxide through the pores of our skin, I guess, or something like that, to get rid of the carbon dioxide. But we're blessed with lungs, so that's why we get to do that. We get to inhale and exhale so that we can make glucose into ATP, a usable energy molecule by our body. ATP is used as energy anywhere in any of our cells. Okay, so cellular respiration, let's take a look at this picture right here, just to take an overview, because it's kind of the opposite. It is the opposite of photosynthesis, in that for cellular respiration, or for photosynthesis, we need sun, carbon dioxide, and water, right? And then the plants turn that into glucose and oxygen. But we then take that glucose, we eat the plant or whatever it is, and we break it down into glucose. That's what goes to our cells. So we break that down and we take the glucose, and we take the glucose plus the oxygen that we breathe in, and in the process we make carbon dioxide as a waste, we make a little bit of water, and then we make a whole bunch of ATP. So we've got instant energy for our cells and for our body and for everything that needs to go on. Alright, so that's kind of the cycle here, where you've got this is a mitochondria in our cells, and that mitochondria is giving water and carbon dioxide, because we exhale that, gives that to the plants. The plants take in the carbon dioxide, they take in the water, plus the energy from the sun, and they give us glucose or sugar and oxygen. And then we use that to make ATP, or energy. So that's kind of how we take a look at what cellular respiration is. Now, cellular respiration happens in 3 phases. The Krebs cycle, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain. So glycolysis is the first step. What happens is glucose is going to make it into the cell. You see this little picture of a cell up here? So glucose is going to make it into the cell, but then it can't get into the mitochondria because it's too big. So the very first step is breaking that sugar molecule in half, and we call this glycolysis, because actually glyco means sugar, lysis means to cut. So glycolysis literally means cutting sugar. So glucose, this is, if you take a look here, we're going to say that each of these dots represents a carbon molecule. If you remember that the formula for glucose is C6H12O6, right? So let's slow it doing this. Alright, so we need 6 carbons to make a glucose molecule. So we're just going to put them in a row so it's easy to see. It's not actually how they appear. So in glycolysis, we haven't made it into the mitochondria yet. So glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. We break that glucose molecule in 2. Now it's called pyruvic acid, and each of these pyruvates is another name that we can call it. Each of these pyruvates has 3 carbons, so we've broken it in half. Now it can get into the mitochondria. So now we move into the next phase, and that's the Krebs cycle. So we're going to go into the mitochondria here. We're just going to follow one of these pyruvates for right now. So this pyruvate goes into the mitochondria. Before it actually gets to the inner sanctum, this is the intermembrane space. If you look at the mitochondria, see how it's got 2 membranes? It's got this one on the outside, and then this squiggly inner membrane. Well, in between the two, we call that the intermembrane space. And then on the very inside, we call that the matrix. See, we've got the matrix right there, and the intermembrane space right there. So here's our intermembrane space, outer membrane, inner membrane, matrix. So we're kind of working our way in there. So we're in the intermembrane space. We've got our pyruvate, but before we can get a little bit further, we peel off a carbon dioxide. And the nice thing about doing that is when we do that, we also make NADH. This is what we call an electron carrier. That's going to be very important. In a little bit, I'll tell you why. But they take electrons and they carry them to the electron transport chain. So this NADH gets filled up with electrons, and then this carbon dioxide gets wasted. Remember, we exhale the carbon dioxide. So every time we make one of these, that goes out in our breathing. So we exhale the carbon dioxide, and let's just kind of save this NADH for a minute while we see what else happens. We'll total it all up at the end. So now we go in. Now we are down to a 2-carbon molecule. We call this acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA then goes into the matrix, and in the actual cycle of Krebs cycle, it's this cycle with a whole bunch of chemical reactions that take place, and we aren't going to have to know all of them, thank goodness. The only one that we really need to know that happens is as it cycles, there's always 4 leftover carbons. And this 2 carbons from acetyl-CoA that we just made, and the leftover carbons join together to make this molecule called citric acid, which is also why this is sometimes called the citric acid cycle. So now we're back up to 6 carbons. Now we begin all these chemical reactions. And I'm not going to do everything in order. I'm just going to tell you what comes out of all of these reactions. So out of all of these reactions, 2 of these carbons are going to get wasted in carbon dioxide. So there's 2 more carbon dioxides that are going to go to waste, that are going to get that we're going to breathe out. Then the rest of these molecules go through their reactions, and as you can see, my arrows are backwards on my Krebs cycle. They should be facing that way. Anyway, in the process, we make 1 ATP, 3 of these high energy electron carriers. They're like taxi cabs for the electrons. So we pull out these electrons, and they actually attach themselves to this molecule, and then it becomes this molecule. So this is the one that we're going to focus on, though, is that 3 NADH. We make 1 FADH2, which does the same thing that NADH does. So for every pyruvate that we made, remember we had glycolysis first. We broke the glucose in half. Then each one was a pyruvate. Then we just followed one of the pyruvates. As we followed one of those pyruvates, we made 1 NADH up here, right up here. Then down here we made 3 more NADH. So for every pyruvate, let's do the Krebs here. For every pyruvate, we make how many NADH? I'm just going to put NH for right now because otherwise it's going to take me forever to type out. So the NADH, we make 4 of them. But remember, we still haven't traced this guy. So we just have to multiply everything by 2. So we followed one pyruvate. So for one pyruvate, we made 4. For the other pyruvate, that means that we have to multiply times 2. So that gives us 8. So we just made 8 electron carriers. Then we made 1 FADH2, so I'm just going to call that F for right now. We made 1 FADH2, but again we have to multiply that times 2 for that other pyruvate, and that's going to give us 2. So in the Krebs cycle we have made 2 FADH2. And then the next, go up for me. Yeah. The next thing that we want to check on is ATP. So we made 1 ATP down here. But again, we have to multiply that times 2 for each pyruvate. So the total then is 2 ATP. So in the Krebs cycle, we made 8 NADH, 2 FADH2, and 2 ATP. These guys go to the electron transport chain. And this one is just used instant energy. So instant energy. And then the carbon dioxides that we make go to waste. They're a waste product. There's something that's made, but we don't need it, so we give it away. It's a waste product. All right. But now let's add that up. Before we go to the electron transport chain, we just figured out the Krebs cycle. Let's just double check. What do we make in glycolysis also? So we have all of the tools before we go to the very end of this whole deal. So up in glycolysis, we didn't really talk about this yet in this video, but here we make 2 ATP and 2 NADH. So in this process of breaking glucose into 2 molecules, we get 2 ATP and we get 2 NADH. I'm just going to write an N so that I don't waste too much time here. So we just made 2 ATP and 2 NADH. So now again, this is instant energy. So our totals going into the electron transport chain, because this is the important part. This is where we make all the ATP. The electron transport chain, we're going in with, here we've got 2 NADH from the Krebs cycle, or 8 NADH from the Krebs cycle and 2 NADH from glycolysis. So total is 10. 10 NADH, carrying electrons to the electron transport chain. And the only other thing that goes to the electron transport chain is the FADH2. Because remember, the carbon dioxide is wasted, and the ATP is just used instantly wherever it's needed. So then we have a total of 2 FADH. I'm just going to abbreviate that F. So these now are going to take us into the electron transport chain. I'm going to make a different video for the electron transport chain. So let's just quick review. What do we do? Glycolysis is the first step of cellular respiration. We break sugar into 2. So we start with a 6 carbon and we end up with 2 3-carbon molecules. We call that pyruvate. So the first step is to break sugar so it fits into the mitochondria. We call this glycolysis. Happens in the cytoplasm. Then we're in the mitochondria. Now we have the Krebs cycle. The main goal of the Krebs cycle is to extract as many electrons as we can. Those electrons have a lot of energy. So we extract as many of them as we can. And we transport them to the electron transport chain using this NADH and FADH2. Now they're going to drop off those electrons, and those electrons are going to be used to make tons of ATP, lots of ATP. Maybe not tons, but lots. And that'll be in the next video.